Hey everybody, it's Van Time with Chuck and Deb, and today we're going to talk about principle and form. Alright, so there's a big difference between principle and form, and if we get the two mixed up, we're really going to get into a lot of trouble. So let's define each one. First, principle. Principle is either a truth or a command. We find them in the Bible. They don't change with culture, context, or time. So commands and truth. Hun, what's a form?
Form is a way to do the principle. So it's a method or a way of putting something into practice.
Right. And
it can change based on culture and environment and
yes,
preference and gifting and et cetera.
Yeah, so form is in jello. Principle is in rebar and concrete. It doesn't change. So now let's talk about some examples of principles. For instance, praying. That's a principle. Make disciples. That's a principle. Jesus being the Son of God and God Himself. That's a principle. What are some examples of forms?
Okay, so you mentioned prayer. So a form of prayer would be on your knees or with your eyes closed or with your hands lifted up into the air. It could be another form might be for a specific amount of time. So that's some ideas.
Good. Yeah. So every principle has a form in order to be practiced. There's no such thing as a principle without form as far as commandments are concerned. In order to fulfill that commandment, you're going to have to figure out a way to obey that command. So now, where we get in trouble, like I said earlier, is when we mix these two up. And in fact, that's where we venture into the area of legalism, when we begin to tout form as principle. The Pharisees got into big trouble on this one, didn't they?
Yes.
Yeah. And Jesus comes off the top ropes on them and says, you've replaced the commandments of God with your traditions. And we could very easily fall into methodolatry and have Jesus rebuke us in the same way if we're not careful. So, Hun, what kind of strife or friction does this cause?
Well, I think that this causes a lot of friction among other believers. For example, the principle of making disciples. Well, one group of believers might use a form that's more intentional, maybe more aggressive, where another group might use a form that's very lengthy, takes a long time, and they could end up warring over their forms, and one could say, well, you're not doing it the right way, and the other would say, well, you're being too slow, so that causes all kinds of problems.
So we don't want to part fellowship over forms. In fact, what we really want to do is celebrate any advance in the kingdom of God. So if a person made one disciple last year, man, we want to do cheetah flips over that. And if a person made 100 disciples last year, well, we want to celebrate that too, and don't down the person because, you're taking shortcuts or whatever. If they are indeed making disciples, then let's celebrate both and more. What else do we have to say about this, hon?
Well, I think that, a lot of times we talk about not having a negative platform. And sometimes, like people are looking at others to find fault so that they can, like say, hey, we're better than these folks because we do this and they do that. And it's really dangerous when you start, emphasizing negative things about somebody else. So we really try and stay with positive. We call it don't bash the bride, whatever form she takes. And so I don't know. We have experienced this, both sides. We've been guilty of it, and we've also been the recipient of it. So, but on the positive side, practice the principles and use a form that works in the context that you're working in, and try not to bash others.
And celebrate every bit of success in the kingdom of God. Alright, hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, pass it on to somebody else. Subscribe right there in the corner, and until next time, keep making disciples until there's no place left. I got a good wife.
Good love, if I do spend time with you.
I feel love when my honey does my van time with